In a laboratory, a few pounds of silvery metal sit in two halves, perfectly harmless. Slide them a hair closer together, and a city could vanish. Same metal, same room. The only thing that changed is an invisible line physicists call critical mass, the threshold where a quiet thing suddenly becomes unstoppable. Here's the strange part. That idea doesn't stay in the lab. Ask a great investor why one startup exploded while a better one died, and they'll describe the same hidden threshold. So will a general. So will a marketer. They borrowed a single concept from physics and used it to see something the rest of us miss. That borrowed idea has a name. It's called a mental model. And a small handful of them turn out to be the difference between people who are usually right and people who are usually wrong. What if thinking better isn't about being smarter, but about the tools you keep in your head? Two people set out to collect those tools, every important one, from every field. What they found was a superpower hiding in plain sight. The two people were Gabriel Weinberg and Mccann. He founded the private search engine DuckDuckGo and trained as a physicist. She's a statistician who spent years designing medical trials. Married and endlessly arguing about how to think, they noticed the sharpest people they knew all seemed to share the same invisible toolkit. They traced it back to the investor Charlie Munger, who put it bluntly, "You need a latticework of models in your head, and 80 or 90 important ones will carry about 90% of the freight in making you a worldly wise person. Not 1,000, 90. So they set out to gather them into one book, the book they wished someone had handed them when they were starting out. Roughly 300 models woven into a single promise they called super thinking, the ability to think a little better about the world and make better decisions because of it. And it starts with an inversion most people never think to make. Most of us try to be right more. Weinberg and Mccann flip it. The inverse of being right more is being wrong less. It sounds like wordplay until you realize it points somewhere completely different. Being right more tempts you to chase brilliance. Being wrong less tells you to hunt down the ways you routinely fool yourself and remove them. The mathematician Carl Jacobi had a motto for hard problems. Invert. Always invert. Stuck? Flip the question. And when you want to understand something from the ground up, reason from first principles. Strip it down to what you actually know is true. When Elon Musk was told batteries would always be wildly expensive, he refused the conventional price. He broke a battery down to its raw metals and priced those instead, and found the real floor was a fraction of what everyone assumed. The lesson isn't about batteries. It's that the obvious answer is often just an assumption nobody bothered to take apart. But before you can take apart the world, you have to take apart yourself. Because your brain runs on shortcuts built for a savanna, not a spreadsheet, and they misfire in predictable ways. Consider a woman named Linda, 31, sharp, deeply concerned with justice, which is more likely that Linda is a bank teller, or a bank teller who's also a feminist. Most people pick the second. It's impossible. A smaller group can never be more likely than the group that contains it. Your mind just prefers the better story. It happens everywhere. Show someone a high number before they guess a price, and their guess drifts upward, an effect called anchoring that salespeople have quietly exploited for a century. Even your search results bend to it. DuckDuckGo ran studies showing the same Google search hands different people, different realities, curated by what they already believe. The trap has a name, the filter bubble, and you're living inside one right now. Here's the most dangerous trap of all. Once you believe something, you defend it. New evidence doesn't correct you, it makes you dig in, which is why being right on its own is never enough. In the 1840s, a Viennese doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed mothers were dying of infection in his ward at terrifying rates. He tried one thing. He made the doctors wash their hands, and the deaths collapsed, from around 1 in 10 to roughly 1 in 25. He had the proof, and his colleagues, insulted by the suggestion that their own hands carried harm, rejected him outright. Semmelweis lost his post, his standing, and eventually his health. He died having never seen the world except what his own numbers had shown. The physicist Richard Feynman drew the only safe conclusion from stories like his. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. So you've started cleaning up your own thinking. Now the world pushes back, because actions have consequences you never intended. Engineers have a grim motto for this. Anything that can go wrong will. Not as despair, as a reminder to prepare for the failure you're pretending won't happen. And those failures follow patterns you can learn to spot. Picture a shared pasture, the Boston Common 3 centuries ago. Any one farmer grazing one more cow barely dents it. So everyone adds one more cow and one more, until the grass is gone and every cow starves. No villain, no single mistake, just each person acting sensibly, adding up to ruin. It's called the tragedy of the commons, and once you see its shape, you see it everywhere. Gridlocked traffic, emptied fisheries, the shared office fridge. The problem isn't bad people, it's a bad structure, and structures can bite back in even stranger ways. When British officials in colonial India worried about venomous cobras, they offered a bounty, cash for every dead cobra. Clever, until enterprising locals began breeding cobras to cash in. The officials scrapped the reward. The breeders set their now worthless snakes loose, and the city ended up with more cobras than it started with. That's the cobra effect, and it exposes a deeper law. The moment a measurement becomes a target, it stops measuring what you actually cared about. A Soviet factory told to produce tons of nails made one gigantic, useless nail. A factory told to make many nails made thousands of tiny, useless ones. Reward the number, and people will hand you the number, not the result. Even trying to bury something backfires. When a celebrity sued to scrub a single photo of her clifftop mansion from an obscure archive, the lawsuit turned an ignored image into worldwide news. They call it the Streisand effect. Push on the world, and it pushes back. So the real skill becomes choosing where to push. Which brings us to the scarcest resource you have, your attention. You can do anything, the saying goes, but not everything. When PayPal was fighting to survive, Peter Thiel handed his team a rule that sounded almost cruel. Write down the single most important problem you could work on, and then he refused to let anyone work on anything else. Focus wasn't a preference, it was survival. The reason focus matters so much is compounding, the quiet engine behind wealth, skill, and reputation. Small advantages repeated don't add up, they multiply, slowly at first, and then explosively. There's an old line the authors love. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. But planting the right tree means aiming your limited energy at the few things with real leverage, and letting go of the comfortable, urgent little tasks that feel like progress and aren't. The best thinkers don't fight the current. They learn how change actually flows and ride it. Some things resist change through sheer inertia. Others tip all at once. A single idea, a single product, sits still and ignored until it crosses a threshold and suddenly it's everywhere. That's our critical mass again, wearing a new coat, the tipping point. Network effects make it fiercer. Each new user of a phone or a marketplace makes the thing more valuable to the next person until it spreads on its own momentum like a flywheel that's finally spinning free. And luck? Even luck has structure. The authors call it your luck surface area. The more you make, share, and connect, the more surfaces there are for good fortune to land on. You can't summon luck, but you can widen the net you're holding out for it, which raises a harder question. When the evidence finally arrives, how do you know it's telling you the truth? Numbers feel like solid ground. They're often quicksand. In the Second World War, analysts studied the bombers limping home riddled with bullet holes and proposed adding armor to the spots that got hit most. The statistician Abraham Wald stopped them. "You're only looking at the planes that came back," he said. "The holes they show you are the survivable hits. Armor the places these planes were never struck, because the planes hit, there are the ones that never returned." That's survivorship bias, and it quietly poisons how we read the world. We study the startups that made it, the creators who blew up, the routines of billionaires, and never count the identical people who did the very same things and vanished without a trace. The winners are visible. The graveyard is silent. And if you only learn from what survived, you'll often learn exactly the wrong lesson. Two more traps hide in almost every headline. The first, correlation is not causation. Ice cream sales and drowning deaths rise together, not because dessert is dangerous, but because both simply follow the summer heat. Whenever two things move as one, hunt for the hidden third thing pulling both. The second is sneakier, the base rate. Imagine a breathalyzer that's 95% accurate, used on a road where only one driver in 1,000 is actually drunk. It flags you. How worried should you be? Almost not at all. Because across all those sober drivers, a 5% error rate produces a flood of false alarms that vastly outnumbers the one rare true one. Ignore how rare something is to begin with, and even a good test will fool you. And this is the heart of being wrong less. Not memorizing answers, but knowing which question the situation is really asking. So how do you decide when the ground keeps shifting? You upgrade past the simple pro and con list. Some risks you can see coming. Some you can't even imagine. The unknown unknowns. The things you don't know that you don't know. And the rare, unforeseeable shock that changes everything has its own name. The black swan. For centuries, Europeans knew that all swans were white, right up until they reached Australia and found a black one. One counterexample, and a certainty is gone forever. But there's a hopeful flip side to all this uncertainty. In 1906, a scientist watched roughly 800 people at a country fair each guess the weight of an ox. No single guess was right, but their average landed within a pound of the true weight. The crowd, taken together, knew what no individual knew. Good decisions, it turns out, often come from widening your view. More scenarios, more perspectives, more voices, before you ever commit. Some of your decisions involve other people who are deciding about you at the same time. That's a different kind of game, literally. Picture two partners in crime, held in separate rooms. If both stay silent, both walk away with a light sentence. If one betrays the other, the traitor goes free and the loyal one takes the fall. So each of them, reasoning coldly, betrays, and both end up worse off than if they'd simply trusted each other. It's called the prisoner's dilemma, and it explains everything from arms races to price wars. Individually rational choices adding up to collective disaster. In the film War Games, a military supercomputer plays out every possible nuclear war at blinding speed, searching for a way to win. At last, it prints its conclusion. A strange game. The only winning move is not to play. Sometimes the sharpest move on the board is to refuse the board entirely. And sometimes other people are quietly playing you. The psychologist Robert Cialdini spent his career cataloging the levers that make us say yes, 6 of them. We return favors, we follow the crowd, we defer to authority, we crave what's scarce. We like to stay consistent with what we've already said. And we're swayed most by people we simply like. Walk into a casino and you're standing inside all 6 at once. The free drink that makes you feel you owe them. The cheering winner who makes reckless risk look normal. The velvet rope glamour of the high roller room. The whole machine is engineered to slip past your judgment. And it works because these levers were pulling on us long before there were casinos. The point isn't to become cynical. It's that once you can name the lever being pulled, it loses its grip. A model you can see coming is a trap you can step around. Everything so far has been about your own mind. But the biggest results come through other people. And here the models flip from defense to offense. The best teams aren't just a little better than average. They're what the authors call a 10x team, many times more effective than a mediocre one. What makes them? Partly deliberate practice, not mindless repetition, but effort aimed just past the edge of your current ability, with honest feedback correcting you in real time. That's the real engine behind the famous 10,000 hours, which, the authors are careful to note, was never actually a hard rule. And underneath it all sits a single quiet belief, whether ability is fixed or can grow. Treat a person as capable of more, and they often rise to meet it. Treat them as stuck, and they stay stuck. Leadership, in the end, is mostly this, unlocking the potential that was already there. Now zoom out to the largest game of all, building something the world will actually pay for. It starts with a secret. The investor Peter Thiel's word for a truth you believe that almost no one else does yet. Every great company, he argued, is built on one. But a secret is worthless until you find the real job people are hiring your product to do. The scholar Clayton Christensen studied why a fast food chain sold so many milkshakes early in the morning. Not because people craved a milkshake at dawn, but because bored, lonely commuters needed something thick enough to last a long, dull drive and easy to handle with one hand on the wheel. The milkshake wasn't breakfast. It was a companion for the commute. Nobody really wants a drill, the old line goes. They want the hole. Find the hole, the job, and you found your market. Even then, success is fragile, because the moment you win, everyone comes for you. The defense is what Warren Buffett calls a moat, something that keeps competitors out long after they've noticed how well you're doing. No story shows the stakes like Kodak. For a century, Kodak's moat looked unbreakable, and in 1975, one of its own engineers invented the digital camera, the future born inside the company. But digital threatened the film that made Kodak rich, so the company quietly buried it. Decades later, the digital wave Kodak itself had invented arrived anyway and swept the company into bankruptcy. The Intel chief, Andy Grove, had a phrase for the only posture that survives a moment like that. Only the paranoid survive. The threat that finally kills you is usually the one you saw first, and then talked yourself out of believing. Which brings us, at last, to the trap that can swallow everything we've covered. It's possible to learn all 300 of these models, to recite critical mass and survivorship bias and the cobra effect at a dinner party, and still think no better than before. Feynman told a story about islanders who, after wartime planes had once landed near them bringing supplies, built runways out of bamboo and wore headsets carved from wood, faithfully copying every ritual they'd seen, and waited for the planes that never came again. They had the form of the thing and none of the substance. He called it cargo cult thinking. You can do exactly the same with mental models. Knowing the name of something, Feynman warned, is not the same as knowing it. A model you can only recite is a bamboo runway. And so the question this whole book has been quietly building toward is simple. How do you cross from naming a thing to actually knowing it? The answer is unglamorous, and it's the one thing that separates the two. You have to use them. Apply a model to a real decision. Get it wrong, watch what actually happens, and adjust until the idea stops being a phrase and becomes a reflex. It helps to know your own edges. Warren Buffett talks about a circle of competence, the zone where your judgment is genuinely sound. The goal isn't to fake expertise everywhere. It's to know exactly where your circle ends, and then to widen it slowly and honestly. Find a thinking partner who will argue with you. Write your reasoning down, where its holes become impossible to hide, and read across every field, because the model that saves you usually comes from a discipline that was never your own. Do that, and the lattice work stops being a list you memorized. It quietly becomes the way you see. Go back to that laboratory and the two halves of quiet metal. Nothing about the metal itself changed as it crossed the threshold, only how close the pieces were allowed to come. Your mind is the same. The facts of your life won't change tonight. What can change is how the pieces sit together, and that shift is the whole difference between being usually wrong and being wrong less. You will never master 300 models. You don't need to. A worldly handful, actually used, carries almost all the weight, and that is super thinking. Not a bigger brain, but a better toolkit, reached for on purpose. The best time to plant that lattice work was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. So here's the one question worth carrying out of all this. The next time you're absolutely certain, how will you check whether you're the easiest person to fool?